all. Welcome to the Product Marketing Show. I'm your host, Trish. And today with me, I have April Dunford. Hi, April. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. So I guess there are not any, I assume there are no listeners on my podcast who don't know about April Dunford. But let me try doing a quick intro.
Oh, come on. There might be a few.
So April has played multiple roles as founder, as marketer, product marketer at global software companies and startups. And probably, I'm trying to figure out, April, what have you not done? Probably you have not done customer success till now.
No, I didn't do customer success, but I did do, like, I started in product marketing and then I, had marketing leadership roles. That was the bulk of my career. But occasionally you get sucked into, like the VP sales gets fired and they make you run sales for a while until they find someone else. I've done that a couple of times. So I have had some overlap on the sales side, and sometimes inside sales would report into me, which is natural in my opinion. But yeah, I've not run a development team. I've not run a customer success team.
So there are a few things which...
Although I have been CEO more than once, actually, but briefly.
Pretty good. And April has also authored one of the most popular books in product positioning, which is obviously awesome. How to stand out in crowded markets. I mean, this book should actually be like how this business schools have marketing books, and probably business schools are still old school and they haven't updated their books. And I mean, that's what I tell all my marketing team, that hey, just read this book before you start. So yeah, before we start, a quick shout out to our sponsors, Content Beta. Content Beta is a video and design service for B2B SaaS. You can now scale your product marketing and customer-enabled content with Content Beta. Now, jumping on to the first question and taking cue from your book, how do you really stand out? I mean, most B2B brands, they have very typical positioning, right? Not too extreme, not too nice. They want to look professional to businesses, and they don't want to take chances like how B2C brands do. Do you think it's time to go bold? And when is the right thing to do?
Yeah, I think our definition of bold in B2C versus B2B is actually really different. And so, and this comes from the way that a B2B purchase process happens versus a B2C purchase process. So, if I'm buying something as a consumer, like let's say I just want a nice cold beverage, I walk into the store, whatever's there, and I might say, hey, Liquid Death, that's hilarious. I'm going to buy that because, I think that's cool, or I've heard about that, or, whatever. And I buy it, and it only cost me a couple of bucks. And if I don't like it, it's no big deal. I don't buy that one again. I didn't have to consult with anybody else to see if it was okay to buy it. And there's lots of different reasons I might buy it. I might buy it because I like the color, I like the branding, or I want to be associated with that, or I've tried it before and I like it. There's lots of different reasons I might purchase. B2B software, on the other hand, that's pretty different. And it's different for a lot of reasons. One is typically the person making a purchase decision in B2B is typically not acting alone. So if you want to go buy, let's take something easy like accounting software, right? How does accounting software get bought? Well, usually maybe the head of accounting or the vice president of finance says, hey, I don't like our accounting software. We've outgrown it. We're doing an audit now. It doesn't have the features we want. We need something different. Now, that person who holds the budget, potentially, generally, they're not going to do the work of figuring out which one to buy. They'll select somebody and say, hey, Janet, you go out and figure out what accounting software we should buy. Look at all the things. Work with IT and make sure they're good with it. And, work with purchasing and legal, make sure they're good with it, and make sure everybody in the accounting group is good with it. Come back to me with a recommendation. I'll write the check. We'll buy it. Now, that person, who we would call the champion in a deal, like, they're a little stressed out here because this isn't like buying a pack of gum or a cola. Like, if they make a poor choice here, bad things happen. potentially if they recommend something that's not very good to their boss, at a minimum, they'll look stupid in front of their boss. Nobody wants that. Maybe they pick something and the end users don't like it, and then the end users are all mad going forward, and you're that idiot that picked that accounting program that didn't work. Or maybe if things are really bad, like maybe you pick something and you fail the audit and the whole company's in trouble, you might actually get fired for making the wrong choice here. So that choice is what we call a considered purchase. And a lot of things we buy in the consumer side, they're not considered purchase. I buy a t-shirt, I don't like it, I just don't buy that one again, no big deal. But in a considered purchase, there's stakes. And if I make a wrong choice, bad things happen. So, I can't just say, hey, you should buy mine because it's the red one. It's not really going to help you out in accounting software. Or buy mine because it's cool. Buy mine. I can't say, hey, buy my database is going to help you get a date. We can't do this in B2B. We have limited choices in terms of the value that we can provide. And if I'm going to be really textbook about it, we're either helping companies make money or we're helping companies save money. And occasionally what we're doing is reducing risk. But that's about it. And so sometimes what I'll get is the B2B marketers, they're all bummed out. They're like, well, why can't we be like Deathwater, man? Just sell a thing that's cool and everyone will buy it because it's cool. And the reason is, your boss won't go for that. You're trying to run it up the chain and say, hey, VP Finance, could we just buy this one? Because it looks great, man. I love their ads. They're so funny. No, I got to make real business recommendations. Now, the flip side of that is, it's not like we don't use our emotions. It's not like we make completely rational buying decisions in B2B. We don't. And in fact, a lot of the things that we have to fight against because we're a startup is we're fighting against this irrational set of feelings that the purchaser might have. And so one of those irrational feelings is, I don't want to get fired. And so the incumbent in a space or the leader in a space has this kind of built-in value of, well, hey, people aren't going to, if you're looking for a CRM, no one's going to get fired for picking Salesforce because everybody uses Salesforce. And if you want to make a really low-risk decision, you pick the market leader. Now, if I'm not the market leader, I'm going to have to do something big to alleviate that fear because I look like a risky choice and something you might get in trouble for. So it is very important that we distinguish ourselves and we stand out, but we don't get to do the same things that consumer brands do in order to stand out. We have to have that differentiation be rooted in business value. Otherwise, you can't go explain it to your boss to get the budget to buy it.
So how do you stand out from Salesforce, and how do you stand out from a category leader if you are in the same boat? And I don't know if this is the right way. I mean, a lot of people say B2B is boring to boring marketing, right? How do you stand out in this case?
Yeah. Well, so if we think of it, let's take Salesforce as an example. So there's lots of reasons why you might not choose Salesforce. Lots of reasons. Like they don't like the thing about the market leader is the market leader, by virtue of the fact that they're selling so much to such a broad set of buyers, they kind of have to be a lot of things to a lot of different markets. And what that means is there's opportunity at the edges of that market where there are customers that are not being particularly well served by Salesforce. So I would make the argument today that small, medium businesses are not well served by Salesforce right now. It is a very difficult product to use at this stage of its evolution. It's very expensive. It's difficult to even set it up and get it deployed. It doesn't have a lot of very specific things. If you're a mid-sized business in a particular area, like I worked for a while at a company that was selling Well, part of what we sold was ERP for mid-sized manufacturers. And there's a lot of things that we wanted to do with our CRM that Salesforce just didn't do because manufacturing was a tiny little sliver of the overall market they were trying to address. So I think it's actually kind of easy to come in and say, you know what, we're not going to come out of the gate and beat Salesforce everywhere. They do billions and billions of revenue. If we're a startup, though, it is possible for us to carve off what is still a very, very big slice of that market and say, you know what, today we can't beat them everywhere, but we can beat them here because they're not paying attention to this corner. And that allows us to get a beachhead into the market, and that allows us to grow and eventually, the company that dethrones Salesforce in the CRM business will come from a company that managed to get a toehold into that business in a place where they weren't really paying attention, and then surf that into a bigger and bigger market until they are actually a threat to the entire business for Salesforce.
So find out gaps rather than fighting with the category leader. Find out gaps and create a business around that. Rather than just saying that, hey, I'm like me too or something.
You're never going to beat the category leader in that, right? Because you can never be close enough to actually beat them. Like you can't copy all their features. They've been in business for more than a decade. You're brand new. Like you don't have the resources to say, oh yeah, we're just like Salesforce. You're not. You're nothing like them. You don't have the same ecosystem they have. You don't have the same platform they have. You don't have the same variety of products. There's a million reasons why they're better than you for the bulk of the market. But that doesn't mean you can't beat them in places. Like I would make the argument right now that the SMB slice of the CRM market is wide open. Like anybody can beat them there because they are not a very good choice for SMBs right now in the market. Too expensive, too difficult to use, too hard to roll out, missing a lot of features that SMBs would like to have, missing a lot of integrations with other things in the stack that an SMB would like to use. Like, I think there's a wide open space right there. And there's a lot of companies making a lot of money in there. I think there's also companies making money at the high end of the market where, there's still specialist providers in there that can do things that Salesforce can't.
Like CRM for vertical industries, let's say real estate.
That's right. So there's a lot of those, like things specifically oriented towards banking or insurance or manufacturing where, market leader just can't get that specialized to do it. And when you do have a specialized solution like that, you can often charge more for it. And the way you expand that market might not be to just go broader in CRM. It might actually be to go deeper in the vertical you're in. So you might say, well, I'm going to start with CRM in manufacturing, let's say, but then I'm going to make my way into other things in the ERP stack, and I'll go that direction rather than spreading out and trying to beat Salesforce. You're never going to beat Salesforce at their own game, which is the world's greatest general purpose sort of, mid to large enterprise CRM. That would be crazy to try to fight them there. But there's a lot of space around that where you could actually fight them quite successfully, I think. And I think that's true of most markets. Most markets, if they're established, there's a leader, yes. And the thing you don't want to do is run straight at the leader and say, oh yeah, I do the same thing they do, only I'm better because I'm, I don't know what, cheaper or something. Like, you'll never win that. But if you come in and say, yeah, we love those guys. They're great for the general purpose market. But we're specialized around this thing. And once you establish a beachhead, then you can figure out, well, how are we going to grow from here?
Awesome. Another buzz which we hear on social media is, if probably not today, even before, like the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing book says that if you can't be number one or number two, try to build a separate category around it. Now it's easy to say, but that's a lot of hard work, and probably very few companies. I mean, Gong has created a separate category called Revenue Intelligence. When should one think in those lines? Is category creation is the right way to go? Yeah,
I think it depends on how you define category. Like, so I've seen some people say, I talked to a company a few weeks ago, and they're in the social media management space, and that's not a new category. There's nothing new about social media management. That has existed for a long time. And they said, no, we're creating a new category because we're social media management for mid-size agencies. And I'm like, well, that you just defined I would say that's a subcategory of social media management, but they sort of considered it a new category because they had carved out this space. So if you think, I would call that a subsegment of an existing category. If you call that a new category, which, the category people just change their definitions of this stuff all the time. So, okay, if you say that's a new category, then I think that's how the vast majority of successful startups start, and many of them do that for 50, 60, 70, 80 million revenue without ever having to get beyond that. Sometimes there's a handful of different reasons why you might want to create an entirely new category. So sometimes what you've got is just the category itself is emerging. Like there is no existing category that kind of works for the thing that you have, and you have no other choice, essentially, because positioning it in any one of the existing categories would actually be underselling what you do. So sometimes you have no choice. You have to create that new category. It's tricky, though, because the history of Silicon Valley teaches us that often the companies that do the hard work of creating the category will then lose it to a fast follower that doesn't have to do the work of creating the category. They come in as number 2 and then they topple you. That's why we don't use Ask Jeeves. We use Google. That's why nobody really remembers MySpace, but Facebook is amazing, right? Most of the things that Apple did, with the exception of the iPad, they were not the first smartphone in the market. BlackBerry was way ahead of them, but they managed to come in and then overtake them. So category creation is often, it's tricky to do. 1, because it's hard to create the category. 2, once you have created it, you have to be very careful to defend against fast followers that will come in and knock you off afterwards. But sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes you got to do it. The other place where category creation, I think, works quite well, and again, I'm not sure I would call this creating a new category, but if we look at some of the examples that get used a lot when people talk about category creation, the company it never started talking about that new category until they were already quite large and were dominating the existing category that they were in. And so once they had dominated that category, then what they did was they said, well, maybe what we can do is stretch the boundaries of the category to increase the size of the market that we now dominate. So I could make the argument that's exactly what Gong is doing, where they're not just call recording, they're actually, sales intelligence or whatever they call it, because they're doing a lot more than just recording the calls. They're analyzing the calls, they're figuring out what things around the call. And so they're, in essence, stretching out the boundaries of the category. So I think that's a little bit different than saying, there was no such thing as smart glasses until Google showed up on the scene and said, we got these things, they're called smart glasses. And you're like, what the heck do smart glasses do? You're going to have to teach me. Whereas it's different to say, hey, I'm absolutely dominating the online survey market, but my growth is slowing down because I dominate that so much. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to expand the boundaries of what you think about surveys as being useful for, and I'm going to call that whatever, something intelligence, and stretch the boundaries on that. I think that's a little bit different. It's almost like redefining the category as opposed to creating a new one.
Nice. And as a marketer, how do you measure? Let's say I have decided on a positioning strategy, right? I'll go ahead with this. How do I measure that if this is headed in the right direction? Is revenue the only metric?
Yeah. So, again, if I'm and this is very much, I'm focused on B2B. So, in B2C, you might measure it in a totally different way. But if we're talking B2B and specifically B2B tech where I live, a lot of times when we do a new positioning, it's hard for us to immediately measure whether the new positioning is better than the old positioning. And that's for a bunch of reasons. Like, one is maybe we got longer deal cycles. It takes us a long time for a lead to actually make it all the way through the process and get closed. So, like, if it takes us, 8 months to close a deal, I've got this new positioning. Do I have to wait 8 months before I can tell whether this thing closes more deals or not? Like, we don't always have the luxury of being able to wait that long. So, in the work that I do, I recommend a handful of things. So what the marketers will want to do is they'll want to take the new positioning, turn it into messaging, and like A/B test messaging on the homepage or something like that. There's a bunch of problems with that. One, now I'm not just testing positioning, I'm actually testing messaging, web page design, a bunch of different things. And and then for B2B, do I even get enough hits on the website to actually get a statistically significant result? And often the answer to that is no, because I don't get that much traffic, because we're not talking B2C here. So I think a better way to test positioning, in my opinion, is, and what I do with clients that come and work with me is we'll do the positioning, then we will take the positioning and we will translate that positioning into a sales story or a sales pitch. Like, here's how we tell the story in a first call with a qualified prospect. And then how we test it is we'll go over to sales and we'll pick a salesperson, and ideally my best salesperson, so that I control for just bad salesmanship. So I've got my best salesperson. I train them on this new sales pitch, and then we will go and do test pitches on qualified prospects. So I know the prospect is in our space. They've been qualified, and then we'll do a bunch of test pitches. And after every test pitch, we might have some stuff that we're trying to tweak. But usually, what happens is after we've done that for, let's say we do like a dozen pitches using that, at some point we'll get to a stage where the sales rep will say, well, I think we've tweaked this pitch as much as we can. And my pass fail criteria is, if the my best sales rep comes to me and says, you know what, I think this pitch works better than the old pitch, and I'm going to stick with the new pitch, we call that a pass. At that point we say, well, I don't know if this is the best positioning in the world, but I know it's better than the old stuff, so we should be using it.
Nice. And you don't have to wait like 6 months to see if people are signing up or converting now.
Like, generally we can rely on the expertise of the sales team to tell us, because that's their job. They're pitching people in first calls all the time. And generally your sales team likes the old pitch better because they're used to it. They've memorized it, they know it, they're comfortable with it. So if you can convince them that a new pitch is better, that usually means it's quite a bit better. So if the salespeople are like, this is easier to pitch, this gets a customer more excited than the old one, this seems to just work better in a first call, then that's usually a pretty good signal that the positioning is better.
Nice. And I have a last question. So what trends do you see for product marketers and marketers in this area that one should be careful about or should bank on it?
I think there's a handful of things. Like, here's the hard thing about marketing in general is there aren't really any easy answers to things. Like, people will come and say, how should I do this precisely? And the answer is almost always, it depends. And even in the B2B positioning work that I do, like, I have a methodology that I follow, but I don't think it works all the time in any case. Like, I think it works in the majority of cases because I've tested it a lot, but but does it work everywhere? It depends. And so I think where product marketers, can get down a bad path, potentially, is, there's a lot of people that spend a lot of time on social media and they sound very confident. And they'll say, this is the way you do the thing. You must always do it this way. And I think we need to have a healthy skepticism and realize that, yes, maybe it did work for that one person in this one time, but it's up to us to actually filter out, is this going to work for my product, in my company, in my situation? And I think that's very hard. So sometimes we'll get something that's very trendy, like category creation is a good example of that. It's very trendy, people are noisy about it. If I just spent all day reading the internet, I might think everyone's creating a category and there's no way you can be successful. But the reality is the vast, vast majority of successful tech companies out there are not creating a new category. That's actually just noise. And so I think people in marketing in general, but product marketers count too, I think they have to be a little bit careful that, there's things out there and they do work. It's not like they're bad. But it depends on whether or not it's going to work for your stuff. And I think everybody's got to be a little bit skeptical and apply their own filters and their own logic on it before they go chase it after something that seems kind of trendy.
Really good, April. Thank you so much for taking our time. I probably exceeded the podcast duration by a few minutes, but really appreciate it. If our listeners would love to learn more about your work or probably need your help, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Well, so these days I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, you can follow me there. I'm probably posting there more than anywhere else. My website is aprildunford.com. And I announced it a few weeks ago, but I'm working on a new book that's coming out in the fall. And so the new book is really about how to take your positioning and translate it into a sales story, because I think this translation from positioning to sales is actually super important. So that's coming in the fall. So if you go on my website and you click on the tab that says books, you can get on the list to be early, to get an early notice of that.
Lovely. I'll put that link in the podcast description so it's easy to access. Alrighty. Thank you, April. Have a lovely day.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having me.